Natalie, Rachel,
Jen?
what colour is this?
Sky blue? Lavender?
Yeah, I
No,
don't...
it's more blue than...
No, it's not lavender. I want to say
No,
like
yeah.
duck egg blue, but I think that's slightly more green.
Yeah, no. I think it's...
Periwinkle? Is that
I think
What's
that's sky blue.
periwinkle? Sky blue. Yeah.
What if I told you it was the colour of wine?
No. Not seen any wine that colour before.
It's going to be one of those colour mixing videos where the guy just he starts out with the opposite colour paint and then mixes in.
No, so we've spoken about this before, I believe. If we've spoken about this on the show, or I've spoken about it with somebody in my private life. But the ancient Greeks described this sea as wine dark.
Huh.
They also described the sky as bronze.
I think we might have talked about this with Ella, who was telling us about glass, the colour glass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Essentially, the ancient Greeks could not see the colour blue. Or perhaps more accurately, they didn't have a word for the colour blue. And so they described the colour of the ocean so it's closer to that of a dark wine. And they described the sky as bronze because it was bright, like shiny bronze. They didn't describe colours with the hue in the same that we do. They described it more with their brightness.
That's so interesting.
What we're talking about today is linguistic relativity.
Ooh.
Svarget?
This
This is exciting.
This was an episode that was suggested by... Yeah, this is an episode that was suggested by one of our community, one of the people who watch our videos, called Gabrielle Protrazo. I don't know how to pronounce
Good
her
job,
name. I'm very
commenters.
sorry about that. I know, right? You can, if you want to, and you're watching this right now and you're thinking, I really want to learn about this thing, you can suggest a topic to us by filling in the form that is in the description down below, like proper YouTubers, eh? Look at that. What do they call it in 2009? The doobly-doo?
Yeah, I was just going to say it in the doobly-doo.
Well, this is an episode that was suggested by one of the lovely people who watch our videos, and this is an interesting theory. It's a thing called linguistic relativity, which is the theory that the language that we use affects how we think. It's one of the more complicated Wikipedia pages I've ever read. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words long, and it's essentially because it's split into two different schools of thought. We've got the now largely discredited theory of linguistic determinism, which essentially claimed that the language that you use places hard limits on your potential as a human being.
Right, that's what I was
And then you've got the
gonna
more
say,
agreed upon theory. Yeah, you've got the more agreed upon theory of linguistic influence, which is more about how the words that you use and how you use them can change how you perceive the world, but not necessarily change your abilities as a human being.
Yeah, because there's some quite sort of sinister, like, deterministic kind of approaches, very, chauvinistic, basically, that are like, people who speak this kind of language are capable of these kinds of things. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, of course. This is an episode of next slide, please. So we will be getting into colonialism.
Cheeky bit of Orientalism.
Well, we spoke a bit about colour there. Colour is a really interesting concept, right? We assign colours to categorise them, and famously in English we didn't have a word for orange until a little bit after the fruit orange existed. So when the fruit orange was first introduced to the UK, to England, we didn't have a word for orange.
I didn't know that.
And then that sort of got evolutionary languagey orange became orange. Prior to the word orange, we described that colour as either a light red or a dark yellow. linguistic determinism suggested that without a word for colour, as a human, we literally couldn't see that colour. It wasn't a colour that we could sort of perceive.
Right. But
As a modern human, that's obviously clearly nonsense, because you can see in this picture here, we can see these hues, we can see all these different colours and all of the things in between those colours as well. And we also know what light is.
That's true, but still, I see I see almost a quarter of the picture as almost the same blue, even though I know that it's quite different. Yeah.
Well, there aren't new colours that we can invent, that we suddenly see a new colour by creating a new language term for that colour. That colour exists, and we might have a word for it, or we might use a code for it. That's often what we use for like paint colours now. Is a specific colour has like a code or like a code name. Autumn breeze, or summer fields. It's like a name of a colour of a paint. But those specific words, they don't make that colour exist. Those colours still existed before we had a name for them.
Yeah.
And that's what linguistic determinism was suggesting, was that those colours, that we couldn't actually perceive those colours until we had the word for them.
Right.
Older languages that didn't have like colours for the same colour categorizations as modern 19th century European languages had were considered more primitive, and so the humans that used them were therefore considered more primitive. It's not a coincidence that those languages were like African languages or Asian languages, and the European scholars who were saying that these languages were more primitive, and therefore the humans that used them were more primitive and couldn't see the same things or do the same things as Europeans. You can put two and two together there.
Lovely bit of chauvinism.
Racism, I think, is the word I would use.
Yeah.
But that's colour, right? That's a sort of a concept that we can think about as like a very, almost like a natural sort of language term. Let's talk about another concept, which is maybe not as sort of base as colour. Have you ever heard of the idea that Inuit languages have 50 words for snow?
Yeah, I'd heard that. Like,
Have you heard
that's a
this
thing
before?
that people say. I thought I'd learned that it's because they actually have like a kind of compound language, like more like German.
Yeah, agglutinative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea behind this statement is that because people who speak Inuit languages, and there's lots of different languages that fall under this Inuit umbrella, and that's people who live in like Alaska, northern Canada, and Greenland, that the sort of the indigenous people of those areas, and they perceive many more types of snow than we do in English, where we have snow. For example, in English we have the word snow, but in Inuit languages they have aput, meaning snow on the ground, or kana, meaning falling snow, or piksirpok, meaning drifting snow, or kimmuksikuk, meaning snowdrift. However, as you said, Inuit languages are examples of a completely different type of language to the language that we speak. You create a word in an Inuit language by getting a root word and then stitching that onto other parts to make a single word.
Right.
So in English, whilst we might use multiple words to refer to a concept, like melting snow or falling snow, in an Inuit language, you get the word for snow and the word for melting, and you plonk them together and create a new word.
Right.
And that's your word for melting snow or falling snow or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not that they have the perception of that's a type of snow that we don't have a perception of.
Yeah.
It's that they literally have a different type of language to us.
Right. Yeah.
It's really, really interesting how also we have more
Yeah.
words for snow.
Sleet,
just
and
snow
like you just said,
as
like
well.
melting snow.
Slush.
If we were experiencing snow so frequently that we found ourselves using like a multiple word descriptor for snow over and over and over and over again, it would kind of become its own word, like in the way that phrases do, like little short phrases. They kind of you say them like it's one word.
Like we've got words like drizzle.
Sleet.
Drizzle to refer to like a sleet. We've got words that refer to things that we do
Like,
experience.
How
Yeah,
many
exactly.
words do we have for dirt, earth, ground, peat, pitch,
Yeah.
like, muck, whatever you want to call it, depending on its context. Got a bunch of different words.
Yeah, and they all
It's
have
important to
slightly
have
different
different
utility. Like it's yeah.
Let's talk time, shall we? There have been studies that show that how a language describes time can affect how you've perceived time. In Swedish, they use terms like long or short to refer to time. So it was a long time, it was a short time. In Spanish, they use terms like a lot or a little. So it was a lot of time, it was a little amount of time. Researchers asked people to estimate how much time had passed whilst showing them a graphic of either a bar moving across a screen or a container being filled. Swedish speakers were misled by the bar, and Spanish speakers were misled by the container. They essentially thought that because the bar had travelled or the container had filled, that more time had passed. So you sat them down for 60 seconds and moved the bar halfway across the screen, and then you sat them down for another 60 seconds and moved the bar all the way across the screen, and you asked them which amount of time was longer, and they would assume that because the bar had moved across the screen, it had been a longer time.
But the Swedish speakers were more likely to do that for the bar, and the Spanish speakers were more likely to do that for filling a container with a little or a lot of food. That's really cool. That's interesting.
It's really really interesting. It's not like changed your perception of time. Like you're still perceiving time. Time is still a concept,
right?
But how you've sort of been influenced as to what the passage of time.
Yeah, because you're influenced by the symbols relating to your description of time. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Language, like as a sort of a languagey person, Rach, does the languages that you speak, do they have like different terms for different things, and they make you think of certain concepts differently?
Yes, but then also yes, that's definitely true. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but also the caveat to that is you learn different languages from different people. So the people that I've learned Hindi mostly from watching Bollywood movies. So if I'm thinking or speaking in Hindi, I'm probably much more dramatic just as a result of that.
Yeah.
I've learned Romanian from people in general who aren't quite as academic. So the way I speak isn't quite as and the way I think as well is not quite as academic. The way I speak English is different around different people as well. So like it's relative in a different way. Like if I'm speaking English here versus if I'm speaking English, just having an argument with my brother about something, it's different.
We've done time. Now let's Doctor Who this up and do space as well. Ooh, that's a really interesting photo, isn't it?
I'm gonna fall into it.
Tom Scott did a really interesting video about features that the English language do not have.
I knew Tom Scott had to come up in this video. doing a video about linguistics, Tom Scott has to appear in it somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly right. In English, we use a thing called relative direction, which means that when we talk about the location of an object, we use words like to the left or to the right. This can be from our perspective or from the perspective of the object. So we can say it's on your left or it's on my left, even when it's on our right. In a lot of native Australian Aboriginal languages, they use what's called absolute direction. The one that's been studied the most is called Gugu Imafir. I think that's how you pronounce it, Gugu Imafir, which is a language that the word kangaroo comes from. It's exciting. That's a nice little tidbit.
Hey.
The way that absolute direction works is that you describe an object's location based on the cardinal direction, so north, south, east, west. So you don't have a left hand and a right hand. You have a west hand and an east hand.
Depending on what way you're facing.
And when you turn 90 degrees... Yeah. And if you turn 90 degrees, your left hand is no longer your east hand. It's now your north hand.
That's so interesting.
And
also,
yeah.
I'm thinking of
so you don't have a west and a east hand.
The amount that people get messed up when they're trying to be like, my left, no, your left, oh no, my left, that kind of thing, when people are facing different directions and things like that, would absolutely, like, obviously that would be completely resolved if you were using like absolute directions and people were like, did know what direction they were facing all times. But I love what that says about like the utility of that. It says it, like, obviously that says that people have a very, very constant awareness of what direction they're facing, like the sort of utility of navigation. Like, that's really cool.
Well, Tom makes a really interesting point in his video that it might not be particularly helpful if you, say, live in London and you get on the tube. But I would also argue that if I'm getting out of a tube station and it's daytime and I'm like trying to figure out where I am on my like Google Maps or whatever, and my direction's not working properly because it never bloody works properly in London.
Yeah.
I sort of instinctively know where north is, depending on what the time of the day is.
I think it's a lot more
but
useful
I would
than
like that skill.
People would expect. Yeah, Sophie always knows where north is. She makes a point of like keeping track. Like, she always, she does, like, and it's useful. Like, it is.
That sounds like.
Yeah.
Because I never know which direction I'm supposed to turn when I get out of the tube station, even if I got the map in front of me, because I don't know which way around it is. That would be so helpful if I learned.
But it really does, like, if you start thinking about it, like Jen says, like where the sun is and like what time of day it is, like as soon, like if you start consciously thinking about it, you do like sort of learn it really quickly. Like, it gets a lot easier very quickly.
Yeah, and so that these people, like these native Australian Aboriginal people who have absolute direction in their language, they sort of instinctively know where north is, blah, blah, blah. But I would also, like, that's not a... That's a learned skill, right?
Yeah,
that's not something that they,
like,
have as a sort of a special skill that they just happen to have from genetics or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a thing that we could learn as well. It's just not necessarily particularly useful when you are, 50 metres underground on the tube.
Yeah.
Anyway, what the bloody hell is going on with linguistic relativity then?
Yeah, what the bloody hell is going on,
We have all
Jen?
of these examples. What the bloody hell is going on? We have all of these examples of how languages have different ways of relating to different concepts, right? It seems that the harder linguistic relativity that suggests that we literally think differently because of the way that we speak is wrong. Because we can sort of see that in the world. We can sort of demonstrate that with our own experiences. But it is the case that how we refer to things does affect how we perceive them, which then in turn can affect a wider society.
Right.
Researchers Kashima and Kashima found that in societies such as Japan, where language drops personal pronouns like you and I, so you don't go, I'm going over here, you just go, going over here.
Right.
They tend to have more collectivist cultures and suggested that it was due to the language. I suspect it's probably not exclusively that. It probably just makes it a little bit easier to be like that, rather than actively making people more collectivist. But it's an interesting sort of thing to contemplate, that if you have a language that doesn't have things like you and I, that they on the whole tend to be a little bit more collectivist.
I would be extremely skeptical. Not that language can like affect social organization, like social stuff like that, but I'm massively skeptical because there's a really, that there's a global history to who like collectivism, like that's based on who has power and who wields it to like allow people to act collectively. And like Latin also like doesn't use like you or I kind of words either, right? Am I right about that, Rach?
I feel like you're not right about that. Well, it has,
but it's basically that's the kind of, it sounds
that...
like an Orientalist statement.
Yeah, I suspect it's not entirely the case. But I can throw you the source if you want to read a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah.
It is the case that the words we use do affect how people react to things. So it's like known that hurricanes that are named, or storms that are named after sort of female sounding names, are more deadly than storms that are named after male names or
I
male
knew it
sounding
would be
names.
that way around.
Because basically people don't, they don't consider the female sounding names as dangerous. So they go,
Oh,
oh,
really?
it's a woman's name, and that's what happens is they go,
I
oh,
just
I'm
thought
not going
you
to take that
meant-
That's
seriously.
interesting.
I thought you meant that if a storm looks particularly deadly, they deliberately give it a woman's name.
No.
'Cause that's in my
they
head.
They alternate. So it's
Right.
completely random chance. It goes A, B, C, D, E, F, and they alternate. A is a male name, B is a female name, C
Ah.
is a male name.
And where are
etc.
our gender neutral names? Where do they come in?
Well, there's no such thing as a gender neutral storm, unfortunately.
Shame.
More non-binary storms.
Like, our dad, if I am going on a flight and I want to know how much my bags weigh and we don't have scales in the house, I hand it to my dad and he says, that's 11.5 kilograms. And then I take it to the airport and it's 11.5 kilograms. So
What?
we just did not inherit that.
How?
It just
How?
very
It's just
remarkably precise.
That kind of stuff's just
And
useful to him, so he bothers to make a
Yeah.
skill of it. That's, we could do that if we tried. If we practice.
Yeah.